To sort of the definition of what's going on with industrialization. Any questions in terms of why and how American historians kind of look at this period of time uniquely? Right? It really is focused on economic change, and the reason is that's the big story. Right? It doesn't mean that the Native Americans in the West are not important. It doesn't mean that Reconstruction is not important. We're going to get back to, obviously, immigration, urbanization. We're going to look at farm population. But by and large, the single most important story of the Gilded Age is an economic revolution. Right? If I've already established, and I would argue that it is, that capitalism is the single most radical thing any of us are going to live through in our lives, this is a period of time where this transformation is going to be taking place. And there's a term that's used. So any questions so far up to this point? Okay, feel the ending back here. The term that's used by a lot of macroeconomics and all that kind of stuff is the multiplier effect. And I use that analogy of throwing a pebble or a rock or something into a kind of a still pool. What ripples throughout the American economy, ripples throughout the American. And the best example of that I talked about last time were railroads. Right? Now you're a seventh grader and you're like, well, there's more stuff, therefore it's a multiplier effect. The basic, simplistic kind of analysis is it's going to produce more stuff. Right? And again, your brother or sister in fourth grade is going to get that. Your college students, your adults. Multiplier effect is industrial capitalism. It's more complex than that. And the point I was making in regards to railroads is that it's going to transform our society. It's going to transform the way in which we live our lives. Just imagine how much life has changed as a result of cell phones, Facebook, the internet, right? Those things are more than just stuff. They're more than just people doing things or making phones. They change the way in which society is operating. So on the one hand, you've got more steel and copper and all that kind of stuff, but it changes the way in which we organize time. It changes the way in which we consider our economy. It changes if you're a barrel maker in Corpus Christi, how you're going to sell your product. And where I was kind of finishing up last time was kind of getting to this point that in essence the multiplier effect is the corporation. Right? What does a corporation do? A corporation is going to be pulling together these resources, intellectual resources, material resources, capital. They're going to organize it. They're going to put it all under one roof. And they're going to make it as efficient as possible. And they're going to do this not by making stuff, but by using their brains, right? By doing profit and loss statements, by making more efficient time schedules, by doing things that an old kind of economy would not reward. So if you talk about the multiplier effect, and you'll see that term again, when you talk about the multiplier effect, it's more than just simply a fourth grade, more stuff. Right? It really cuts to the heart of what our economy is today. And again, in 2012, hopefully nobody here is afraid of that. Nobody is looking and saying, oh my goodness, everything's changing so rapidly. Right? We've all grown up, even ancient Blanqui has grown up in an environment like that. These people haven't. They're going to look and say, we want to conserve some things that we've got in our life. And they're going to battle to try and do that. And it's going to be quite interesting to see who those players are who are saying to industrial capitalism, slow down. Right? We're losing what we think of ourselves as American citizens. So make sure and recognize that term is more than just simply stuff. Right? It's more than just simply more video, more cell phones and cars and what have you. It's the way in which we organize our life. And again, you guys with your cell phones are pretty hip to that, pretty aware of what that means. All right. So as organized capital gets more effective changes as a result, the flip side of the same coin is organized labor. And again, it's I don't want to belittle the argument, but you hear people go, oh well, corporations are okay, but labor unions are not. It's absurd. It's like saying daytime is okay, but nighttime is not. They simply are different sides of the same economic transformation. Corporations are organized capital. I think they're a good thing, right? I'm okay with that. It's part of our industrial economic process. Organized labor is going to grow weaker, largely because most of these workers are going to become more dependent. So we're starting with an added disadvantage. What we're going to see throughout the Gilded Age are efforts at trying to create organized labor that are going to fail. Labor unions are not really successful until the 20th century. There's going to be major changes as a result. It doesn't mean they're going to try. They're not going to try, I should say. What are some of these factors of dependency? The most obvious is just simply relocation. In 1860, 60%, 2/3 of the American public lived in rural or farm settings. By 1900, reverse it. 60% lived in urban or industrialized regions. What does that mean? It means that your life has changed, the way in which you live your life, the work that you do. You now have a boss. You now have a time that you have to be there. There are rules and obligations. You have to wear certain things. You have to act in a certain way. All of these require an adjustment period. Right? If you're living on a farm or you're on a dairy farm or something like that, your jobs are set by the task. Right? You got to feed the horses. You got to weed the tobacco patch. That is not the case in an urban environment, a factory environment. You do what you're told to do when you're told to do it. Right? And it changes the way in which labor is conceived. Right? And we're going to see the various arguments in regards to that. Second example, you're no longer paid for what you do, you're paid for the hours that you are there. Right? You don't show up, you don't get paid. Right? Again, 2012, duh, right? Hello. But that is not the way most Americans we're going to see are going to look at the job holistically. My job is to raise cattle. My job is to make steel. It isn't my job is to be there at 8 o'clock on Monday morning and leave at 6 o'clock on Monday night. But that is a transformation that this economic change is bringing about. What's the average workload for most of these people? How many days a week did they work? Take a guess? Not 7, 6 and 1/2. You work 6 days a week and half day on Sundays. You got Sunday morning off. But at 12 o'clock noon, you better be there, you're going to lose your job. How many hours a week how many hours a day did you work? Usually 12 in industrial. 6 and 1/2 days, 12 hours a day. Right? That was your labor requirement in regards to these wage labor systems. And it sure as hell made it easy if you could hire kids to do this, right? Because kids can't vote, kids aren't, they can't organize. You can easily replace them. And so you're starting with an argument that says industrial laborers have this element of dependency built into it. The third component is that they're taking place in cities. And again, 2012, of course they're in cities belonging. Most industrialization before the Civil War took place in the countryside. That's where the coal was. That's where the firewood was. That's where the water power was. With new technologies that allow people to then concentrate around the population centers. You have railroads now that bring coal into these regions. You have railroads that can bring these people to their jobs. And a city is a complex place. Right? You don't live with mom and dad. You have to find a place to live. You got to find a place to eat. You got to figure out what the rules are. People don't know you. It's an anonymous place. Again, this takes place during the Gilded Age. Major urbanization is going to take place during the latter half of the 19th century. Where is it taking place? Oh, it's taking place in, Corpus Christi's not even on the freaking map, right? We're covered up by the legend down here, right? What does this say? Oh, Northerners are all there. No, the money, the economics are justifying this, are making it possible. All of the major urban centers, all of the major large urban centers are also the major economic centers of the United States. They go hand in hand. You don't just have, unions and corporations. You can't just say, well, I like cities, but I hate industrialization. Well, you're not going to get very far in the 19th century. A city like Chicago, where I'm from, classic example. 1833 is the first time they put down lines on a map. They platted it. Right? So the first time you see Chicago is 1833. No one lived there. It was an outpost. By 1900, there's 1 million people there. That's 2 generations. Right? And 90% of those we're going to see are either first or second generation Americans. Right, so these urban locations are taking place at the place where the economic change is the most focused. Where isn't it happening? It's not happening in the Old South, in the old Confederacy. The one exception to that, Birmingham, a thriving steel town, is going to get crushed by Andrew Carnegie as a competitor. Right? And they didn't have the resources to be able to compete on a national level. And the fourth one, at least the fourth one I'm going to look at, is that you see this rising period of immigration. Why? Why do immigrants come here? They want to be Dallas Cowboy fans? Right? They want to come to South Texas, be Bear fans, more importantly, Chicago Bear fans. Certainly not Cub fans, right? They like Michael Jackson and all that kind of stuff. They come here, there's a small percentage who come here for political purposes. They come here almost exclusively as a result of economic opportunity. And again, today, all around, legal immigration. You want to stop illegal immigration? I got an easy solution for you. Put everyone who hires an illegal immigrant in jail. You'll stop pretty quickly. Right? They are economic, the phrase of the time, birds of passage. Many of them want to come here and go home. Right? They're seeing economic opportunity. If you want to see a real litmus test of whether or not our economy works or doesn't work, look at the immigration rate, because it's going to fall to nothing in the 1930s. People don't want to come here as a result of our economic troubles. Right? Immigration is going to be the indicator of where people are moving for economic opportunity. Are they vulnerable? Yeah, they're extremely vulnerable. They don't speak the language. They don't have the customs. They're seen as outsiders. Henry Fayol said. They're seen as outsiders. They're not individuals who are empowered in American society. Right? It makes them dependent. And it puts them at a disadvantage when trying to. And particularly if you're a native-born American and you got an industrial job and in come a bunch of Italians or Irish or Slavs or something like that, you're going to see them as outsiders, as others. You're going to be angry at the fact, and you're going to focus on the fact that they're different kind of people. Yes?
Why do they choose the United States over other countries?
Because of our economy. Because our economy was absolutely on fire. Right? I mean, there were other regions that were industrializing relatively quickly, England and France, but by and large, in Germany, those regions were being developed from people who were already there. Most of these immigrants are being displaced from their farms, from small, previous, just like we saw in Reconstruction. So their economic dislocations are very similar to what's taking place in the American economy. And they're coming here in large part because they could come here. Right? We had open immigration policy. That's going to change. Right? Where are these immigrants coming? And again, this image is probably the most effective way in which to suggest what's going on in the economy. Notice, the dark colors are the percentages. These are largely overrepresented because of the fact there's a low population in those regions already. And so you bring a couple hundred people in, it really jacks up the percentages. The areas where they're going is in this industrial heartland right here, but more importantly, where are they not going? What does that say about the Southern economy? There is no economic mobility. It's the point I was raising about Reconstruction. There were choices made based on very interesting kind of, what a black person is in American society and in Southern society that are going to absolutely set the Southern economy into concrete. It didn't hurt the fact, it didn't help the fact that Northern capital is basically going to be paying the piper to say, no, all we want is the raw material. Get them to us any way you can. But if you're an immigrant, you sure as hell aren't going to those regions because there's no opportunity there. That's not the case anymore. Right? That says something about our economy nationwide. All four of these are examples of the way in which rising dependency is going to have a real effect on how Americans are going to respond to these economic challenges. Right? And I usually don't put graphs like this up, but I think it's important to recognize. So here we're talking basically the Gilded Age, right? That 1870 and 1900 period of time. And what you're seeing for the very first time on the globe is this pattern of rising and falling economies, right? Up and down, up and down, up and down. And it almost, if you kind of smooth it out, it almost looks like a heartbeat, right? That's exactly what it is with the capitalist system. Right? There is a business cycle that takes place. And it's very much tied to human nature, right? So when the economy is crashing, and you got a business that you own, what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever you can to make sure you don't lose that business. You're going to lay off people. You're going to stop production. It's going to create this cycle of a downward swing. And at a certain point in time, you're going to look and say, you know what, I can probably make more money if I start hiring people. And you start hiring people, and over exuberance, I can hire 10, I can hire 100, I can hire 1,000. And I can bring in all these people. There's a natural cycle that develops for the first time in the American economy that we are going to see repeated until 2012 and probably for a lot longer. That is the nature of an economic business cycle. And it is as regular as fall, winter, summer, and spring. Right? What you do notice here, hopefully, is that these downturns are going to be quite severe. If there wasn't a Great Depression in the 1920s, the 1929, there would have been a Great Depression. It would have been called the Great Depression of 1893. Almost the entire American economy goes on the fringe. It's completely flat. Right? And during this period of time, you see 1, 2, 3 major economic depressions. or recessions, depending on the definition. And yet at the same time, the overall growth of this period averaged 6% per year. Today, the greatest days of the 1990s, the United States economy was growing by about 2.6, 2.7%. People were making money in buckets, right? I mean, it was a great economy. Averaged 6% growth per year. The question is it fair for a businessman, for example, to say, oh, my business is under threat. I want my kids to inherit this business. I need to do what I can to control, that word, control my economic livelihood. Is that fair? Everyone in the room's got a reasonable answer to that. I would argue it is. Right? They're not bad or wrong for doing that or concerned with their own personal property. Is it bad or wrong for someone to look and say, you know what? I'm going to form an industrial union. I'm going to form a group that's going to give me control over it. Oh, that is bad. Yes, that's bad. Right? And again, I'm kind of making fun of it. It's kind of the third grade reaction. Oh, one's good and one's bad. They're doing the same thing. They're responding to the same pressures. But as we're going to see, there's going to be an advantage to capital, to organized capital, and that advantage is going to be called the United States government, right, in terms of what they're going to allow and disallow. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, isn't it sad, isn't it terrible, and shouldn't we have done this, and shouldn't we have done that? But to say, in essence, there is a game afoot here. There is a relationship that's unfolding. And the question, again, is how do these people survive in this? How do the skilled, unskilled, and capitalist groups respond to these things? And it's really important that I'm using this term skill, particularly to an audience in the university. You are here to gain skills. You are here to demonstrate to others that you have control over those skills, that you can manage those skills. Right? Arguably, the empty seats around you indicate they can't. Right? I'm just saying. Right? That's what they say to employers. That's what employers ask. Sometimes go up to the Office of Student Affairs and ask them what employers are asking them. Attendance records, behavior in class, whether or not they've been on academic probation. That's what employers want to know. Because they don't really care if you killed an agent. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. Right? If Blanky tells you that's fantastic. But what you're demonstrating is an ability to get the job done. That's a skill. Right? And skill is the edge. Skill is the knife edge of dividing line between these two. All right, let's look at the first group, this reaction, skilled laborers. I come back to these iron workers. These are skilled workers. They know how to take a pile of dirt, right, iron ore, melt it down, clear it out, take the impurities out, at the right temperature, at the right time, turn this into something, not just iron, pig iron or something like that, but to turn it into steel. Right? That is not easily done. That is something that's not easily replaced. If these people didn't show up to work, how much steel would they make? Zero. Right? It's the same thing we were talking about in regards to southern agriculture. This is not Blanky with the broom, not with the skill as a regard to that. They recognize this, they want to defend this, and they're going to do what they can to protect this skill. Why? Because it's going to gain them an element of control. To be seen as a dependent, as someone without skills, is the worst thing that can happen to this population. Who are they? They're about a fifth of the workforce, almost exclusively male, and either native-born or from Western Europe. So they're traditionally, French, or most of them are German, English, Irish, Scottish, those types, right? And if you think of some of the skilled laborers, these always seem to stick in my mind. Anheuser-Busch, Miller, Bush, the beer brewers. Right? Everybody, they're doing a big weekend coming up. Beer brewers, look at those names. Those are all skilled manufacturers. It takes skill to do something like brew beer and not poison your clients in the 1860s and 1870s. Right? To protect those skills, what did they do? They formed around their craft. And these are sort of some odds. I love the steel production. Steel isn't just, again, dumping a load of dirt into one side, now comes steel. You had steel bangers, steel rollers, steel puddlers. I always wanted to be a steel banger. You saw the image last time. They were hammering these ingots into these various shapes. These people had particular skills. Let's say I'm a capitalist. I get $1 million contract to make 2 tons of steel or 5 tons of steel. I can't make it. I got to go to these skilled workers and say, when are you going to be willing to do it? And the term that comes out that they use is, here's a stint. Everyone's heard that term before. Well, he did a stint. What does that mean? It means a good day's labor. And what it means is a good day's labor in the minds of the person who controls that labor. Right? And anybody who's done, yard work or roofing or something like that, some days you go up, on yard work, and it's going to stay with steel work. Some days what you do is basically just separate out the slag, the bad stuff from the good, in terms of what you're going to use. They used to have Sundays off, all of Sundays off, and so many of them were a little hungover. Right? They would, on Mondays, work maybe 2 or 3 hours. On Tuesdays, maybe 10 or 12 hours. On Wednesdays, maybe 20 hours. But they would determine when they worked, how hard they worked, who they hired to get the job done, not the capitalists. Why? Because they controlled their skill level. Right? And they wanted more than anything else to avoid being turned into unskilled operatives, somebody without a skill, pushing a button, pushing a broom, right? Pulling a lever. Because there's no skill involved in that. If I don't show up to work, I'm fired and I'm replaced by 100 other people. Right? So they're going to form unions based on those crafts, on those very specific technical skills that they possess. And they're going to be very jealous of those, and they're not going to want to join up in solidarity with immigrants or with women or particularly children and those kinds of groups. Their unions are going to be fairly successful, the most successful of the Gilded Age. Less so as what industry is going to mechanize. They're going to take those skills away. A second group, and a much bigger group, are unskilled labor. And I always want to drive this point home. Easily, a third of this population, if they're not immigrants or women, are children. Right? Those who are 8, 9, 10 years old. The use of children in industrial labor has all kinds of benefits. You don't have to pay them as much. They don't complain as much. You can physically dominate them. They're uneducated. Right? You can pay them less, and you can replace them quite easily. The best example are these breaker boys in the coal industry. And in essence, it's a room, ironically, very similar to this. Right? We would just have you turn around 180 degrees. Your chairs would be facing that way. And what a breaker room is basically a load of coal, truckload of coal would just come up in the back of the room, and you would dump out and come down these chutes. And you would be sitting there all day, 6.5 days a week, 12 hours a day, taking the slag out, taking the bad stuff out. The coal goes down the chute, the rocks get pulled out. That's what you do all day long. Right? Well, why didn't they quit? Why didn't they speak up? Right? And I always like this. This is from the 1960s. Shorty Slick. I mean, it sounds like some guy from a hip-hop band or something. Shorty Slick. He's going to give his recollection. And it's not, and I don't give this to, oh, how sad it is. Notice the reality that this individual faced. What kind of control did he have over his job? And how dependent was he on it? Again, remembering when Shorty started working, he was 10 years old. Right? And most of you have family relations who are 10 years old. Not necessarily the most mature individuals ever. So.
Well, I first started to work as a breaker when I was 12 years old. Well, what a place. You sat on a hard seat. You didn't dare cushion it nowhere. No matter how much what you have, you have to sit on that plain plank with your feet in the chute and bend over like this, throwing the rock out. A man who's known as a slate boss, walking around with a broom, shovel broom. He'd look behind you. If you live in a rockabye, you got a poke or a sock across the back. Well, I'll tell you, it was very scary. Believe me. Really, I don't know how in the world I got the nerve to go there in the first place. You didn't dare say anything. You didn't dare quit. Because it was something to have a job. At 8 cents an hour. You didn't wear gloves. You didn't dare. You weren't allowed to wear gloves. Your fingernails, you had none. The ends of them would be bleeding every day you come from work. So we fashioned out amongst ourselves, our boys, got old electric wire and old burnt insulation off and fashioned a little stick, twisted it around, made a finger, and then used to slide them over, at least 2 fingers on each hand. Protect the 2 longest fingers, and that was a big protection to the nails. You were allowed to use them, gloves never. And I'm telling you, it was a living hell. Cold weather, it was terrible. Cold, froze, your feet I used to wrap my feet in newspapers. You had to, and then your feet would get cold because you were sitting there. It wasn't moving.
12 hours a day, 6.5 days a week for 8 cents an hour. Why didn't they get more wage? Wasn't there a minimum wage? No, there's no minimum wage. There is not going to be a minimum wage until organized labor is going to force organized capital to do that. What about safety conditions? Not going to be there until organized labor is going to force organized capital to do that. Right? That's the dynamic that's at play here. If you're a skilled worker, this is the scariest thing in the world, right? Because obviously you're not going to sit there like a kid doing this job, but what if you're making steel like that, right? Poking it back. Let's go, monkey, move it along, right? Westinghouse floor. That's the dynamic at play here in terms of these two skill sets. And it scared the hell out of the skilled laborers to get shoved into this group. They're going to be very, very cautious about joining up with anyone like this in regards to that. Are black people involved here? People of color, immigrants? No, they couldn't even get these jobs. These were the good jobs, right? These were not even a part of that. The idea was to form a union that included all of these workers. So you're really kind of, you're ignoring skill and saying, instead of just the first row of skilled laborers at a company, everyone is going to be a part of that. All mine workers, all steel workers, all of the people who build automobiles. And these industrial unions, because you're bringing everybody in, are going to face challenges that skilled labor unions did not. Right? Because over here is a group of Mexicans, and over here is a group of Italians, and over here is a group of women and Jews and all that kind of stuff. That is going to be the biggest impediment for these successful unions to form. We're going to see an example of both skilled and unskilled labor unions and their relative success. Both of them are going to fail in the Gilded Age. One of them is going to survive, and that's the skilled group. But by and large, they're not going to have much success in organizing these people together. What is going to pull them together? Well, we kind of talked on a couple of these things. Child and immigrant labor. Right? Why? Are they benevolent? Oh, the poor little children, we want to take care of it. We want to make sure little shorty is not going to be scared while going to work. Is that why they're doing this? Hell no, right? They're competitors. Pass a law to prevent businesses from hiring children, and you open up jobs elsewhere. Pass immigrant restriction laws. And again, all these Irishmen and Germans and beer drinkers and Jews, and in particular the Chinese, right? Why the Chinese? Because no one had ever seen a Chinese person. They were all on the West Coast. All the industries on the East Coast. But my God, it's just like the Indians. They've never seen one, but they're looking and saying, they come in millions. Like, oh, they're going to take our jobs. You're going to see repeatedly that these labor organizations are going to have high on their list, no child labor, no immigrant labor, and stop all Chinese immigration. Right? Because we can't have those individuals here taking our jobs. Safety is going to be probably the one that is the most important because everybody can get hurt. And the idea of getting hurt in this period of time, there is no social safety net. There is no any, policies in place that you can turn around and say, well, I was working at this job and, I was working at this factory and I ripped my arm off and I get some sort of compensation. What are you talking about? Right? By the way, again, those are not going to become American law until organized labor forces them to become American law. It's an economic game that they're playing. It's with serious consequences. Even skilled laborers are going to be kind of drawn to this question about safety. There is no more skilled proponents of skilled labor than the railroad industry, brakemen, firemen, engineers, etc. What you're looking at here in this is, first of all, the historian's propensity to show trains coming in and out of tunnels. I mean, what would Dr. Freud say? You'll see up here the actual brake settings, and then you're going to see a brakeman right here, and then one later on. If you think about it, what you're setting, they're sort of like mouse traps. You ever put a mouse trap, right? It's sort of physically, this thing is kind of cocked to be able to go off at one time. And the idea is that when the engineer needs to slow down the train going downhill, he hits the brakes and all of them go off at once. If they don't, you can derail. If you're on top of those and they malfunction, over the side you go, right? By the 1880s, there was already a mechanical brake that could do this quite safely. Businesses would install them. Why? Because it was a hell of a lot less expensive to hire a new brakeman than it was to install these on their machines. If you've ever seen Fight Club, there's a scene in Fight Club, which I've used before, right? Where, there's an accident and, we're not recalling a car unless the cost of that recall is less than the litigation that we're going to face in the modern era. So safety becomes an organizing issue. What about the time itself? One of the organizing rallying songs they all sang, because there was no radio and there was no, so they were singing these songs, solidarity songs, whatever. It's called 8 Hours for What We Will. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for what we will. There's two messages coming out of this. The first one is what? Is a reform message. I already told you, what's the average work day? 12 hours. Right? What they're arguing is that if you drop it to an 8-hour work day, not only do I get to work 4 hours less, but you're going to have to hire an additional shift. If you're working people 2 12-hour shifts, you only have 2 shifts to employ. If you have 3 8-hour shifts, you're going to have to employ another shift. Raises the amount of employment opportunities. But equally important, leave us the hell alone with the time that we spend on ourselves. If I want to go to church, if I want to go to the bar, if I want to go to the movies, if I want to hang out with my friends, if I want to go play baseball, I can do what I want to do. Right? Tell me that isn't part of the American experience. Tell me that's not a core bedrock value of what it means to be an American citizen. And they're arguing, in essence, that the economic model does not allow for that. They want to be American citizens. They want to be, they're legally American citizens. They want to have the ability to live that life. Right? And it becomes a very powerful, again, organizing force of all laborers. Right? The ones that don't happen, I think, are equally interesting. And I love this one, wages, class consciousness. There's none of that. Right? Karl Marx is writing during this period of time, and most Americans just totally ignore him. Yeah, some European guy, I don't know what he's talking about, right? Go back to history, Mr. Marx. There are a lot of people in Europe at this point in time. Socialism, it gets no traction in the United States. The first socialist party of America in the United States is not until the 20th century. Don't go looking for, scary things in the closet. Oh, well, here's socialism, here's communism. It doesn't exist. Right? They do have a strong labor ideology. The Republican Party has a strong labor ideology. To be an American means to be proud of your labors and to have dirt under your fingernails. To look and say, I'm not somebody who's doing it, I'm making it myself. I'm getting by myself. This industrial transformation is going, so you don't see this is a European political cartoon. You don't see that in this country. You don't see socialist parties. You don't see a capitalist party either. There's an argument along those lines. And the historians for the longest time have, I know socialism in the United States. And the argument that most of them have come up with is because there already is a very strong labor ideology, well ingrained in the United States, that is being destroyed by industrial capitalism. Right? All we have left now are truck commercials and, I'm hardworking, whatever. Right? That value has been eroded over the years, largely because of the economic system that we're in practice. And we're pretty much cool with it, right? In 2012, that's the way it is. By 1936, I'm going to show a film clip here by Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin is a physical comedian, and he's a comedian like, I don't know who would be a good example today. Jim Carrey used to be in the 90s, what have you. He is somebody who is going to become literally the world's single largest star. Everybody knew him, everybody liked him, his films are funny then, his films are funny today. His last film is The Little Tramp, as the guy with the mustache and the baggy pants and all that. There's a movie called Modern Times, and I would strongly suggest if you like old movies, black and white movies, to see it. It's not a silent movie, although Charlie doesn't talk. He doesn't have any speaking lines. But it's dealing with this sense. Now recognize, we're not talking about the Gilded Age here, we're talking about 1936. It's dealing with the way in which this affects the average American economically, socially, intellectually. Charlie's a part of one of these industrial labor groups, and you'll see he does a repetitive job over and over and over and over and over again. And he finally goes crazy. It drives him insane. Right? This is not work. This is not something I'm proud to be. And the film kind of poses a question. He's going to start acting strange, but his strange acting is a hell of a lot more human than you see everyone else around him. When Charlie gets to the point where he's starting, these people are trying to stop him, all he has to do is flip the switches back on. The machinery starts to run, right? The bells go off. Everybody's back doing their work. Everybody's doing their repetitive work. And he's sort of playing off of this idea of what have we got? We've gotten much more regimented as a result of this modern society. It's a critique. Right? The film is sort of interesting. He gets arrested because of this. He gets tossed in jail. One of my favorites is that his cellmate is distributing cocaine in prison. Charlie doesn't know what it is, and this guy, there's a search of the cells, and the guy tells Charlie, hold this for me. Charlie takes his Parmesan cheese and he puts it on his spaghetti, right? You know, he just gobs of it, right? It's just like inch thick. He's eating this stuff, and all of a sudden, right, there's a prison riot, and Charlie is like, you know, he's like Mr. Superman, and he breaks the prison riot, and he becomes a hero. Right? So there's all these kinds of accidental events that take place, and this is an example of it as well. But he's getting at this idea of what has changed, what are our perspectives? What Charlie Chaplin would you want to be in terms of this film, in terms of what better represents you as Hi.
Section 5, give it a limit.
Cultural historian, I like this stuff. Chaplin is much more gutsy when it comes to making these. He is an established star. He's a multi-millionaire. 2 years later, when everyone is peeing their pants over Adolf Hitler, he's going to make a movie called Little Dictator that is going to absolutely mock Hitler, where everyone's like, oh, you can't do that, it's Adolf Hitler. Right? So he is making a statement, obviously, free from the cost, economic cost. This is something that's made years later. But it gets very effectively. You'll remember that a hell of a lot more than Blanque's discussion about skilled and unskilled, because he's really kind of putting into argument, which would you rather be? Right? You'd much rather be an American individual citizen than you'd like to be a part of this manufacturing. Dependency and control, and here's over. Same thing for capitalism. Right? There's nothing good or bad about it. It is a reality. There are tigers in the woods. Right? Dependency and control is the reasons why they're acting the way they're doing. Class consciousness is almost non-existent. Socialism, right? Non-existent. Right? You have people who are writing about it and they're completely ignored, as we're going to be seeing in quite detail. Right? Ideology is relatively weak when compared to this other group that we're going to be talking about. They have pretty strong ideology in terms of why they are who they are and what they are. What about politics? We talk about unions. Haven't talked about that. Right? They're not really all that relevant. It's an economic issue. It's not a question of Republican-Democrat. And they're pretty much split on this issue themselves. What about the last group, captains of industry, which is a euphemism? These are capitalists. And I want to make sure and underscore that. Remember the Gordon Gekko clip? Making $200,000 a year. Are you a capitalist? Not really. You're comfortable. You can afford the things you want, but you're not fungible. You're not Gordon Gekko. You're not the guy with the billions of dollars that are going to be making these decisions. You're not the chairman of the board. What you're looking at here is about $4 billion in 1890 money, when it was really, a billion was something. And you recognize a lot of the last names: Stanford, Vanderbilt, Carnegie. These individuals are going to endow some of the greatest research institutions on the planet and in the United States. And they call themselves captains of industry. It was a clear effort at saying, in essence, we're the pilots of the ship. You're on board. You may be in steerage. You may be, in chains downstairs, whatever. But we're the ones who are in charge of steering this ship. They are, in essence, also referred to as America's royalty. That should start making any American a little itchy. Royalty? Wait a minute, did we cut those heads? We didn't cut heads off, but we clapped when the French did, right? Get the hell out of here with your aristocracy. That's not who we are as a people. Right? But these individuals are going to largely lay claim to that. They're going to go to Europe and buy everything that wasn't nailed down. They're going to marry European aristocrats to try and kind of label that. And you get another kind of counter view of these individuals, the robber barons. Recognize that term as a very much pejorative one. It's a negative one. It's not something that they would be proud of at the time. Maybe today they would be. And you have a new kind of critique of saying, what does it mean to the United States that you've got this kind of amassed capital? What does it mean when the 1%, to use today's phrase, are able to do exactly this to Uncle Sam? Right? Charles Francis Adams. Oh, here comes the socialist. Charles Francis Adams is the son of the United States president and the grandson of the guy who helped write the Declaration of Independence, John Adams. This is not somebody who's an outside bomb-throwing anarchist or something like that. And he's asking a very simple question. What happens to this country when you have this kind of concentrated capital? He's not saying get rid of it, but what he's saying is that this has changed the equation in the United States. We need railroads, we need telegraphs, we need all the things that Carnegie and the others are providing. But they can hold us accountable. They can shut down those assets. What is the new relationship as a result of this? Right? Who are these individuals? What they are the representation of organized capital, which is called a corporation. And we've already talked about that. And the initial efforts at trying to organize capital kind of are awkward and ill-considered. By and large, they try to do pools or cartels, informal agreements. I was like this. Give me an example of a cartel. Everyone always comes up with one answer. I'm always thinking of one. Somebody's thinking of yours. The OPEC is a cartel. Usually people, the drug cartel. Yeah, I'm looking at the drug cartel. Whatever. These are informal agreements. There's nothing. They're not formally tied together. Libya and Iraq and Iran and the oil-producing countries don't have formal agreements on how much oil they're going to produce. They get together every quarter or whatever and say, well, this is how much we're going to set as a group. When times get tough, right? If you have an organization like that, you're here in South Texas and you're drilling oil. It's a little early, but what the heck? And you got a bunch of oil drillers and wildcatters and rig heads in one hand, and you're saying, well, let's all agree that we're only going to sell our barrel of oil for $1 a barrel, right? When times get tough, remember that graph? Up and down, up and down. All of a sudden you're looking and saying, oh, let's lose my business. But I promised Charlie I wouldn't sell oil for less than $1 a barrel. What are you going to do? What would I do? What would you do? Would you sell for less? I would. If I was going to lose my business? Oh, bad, Blondie. Too bad. Right? I'm going to make a decision based on me, based on enlightened self-interest. That's exactly what these folks do. It's exactly what organized labor does. And these pools and cartels break down. What is going to supplant them is something called vertical integration. Vertical integration, right? Companies that are going to do all of the things, so we're talking about the oil industry, getting the oil out of the ground, transporting the crude to the refineries, cracking it so you've got all kinds of products that you can sell, shipping that out to the consumer, and retailing it. All of those become part of this. That's what's going to work. And the question is, well, everyone's played the game Monopoly. Are monopolies the norm for an industrial capitalist society? The answer is no. Monopolies are rare. They don't work. There are no monopolies in the United States. What develops is a little fancier term called an oligarchy. And what it means is you got 4 or 5 groups that are going to basically control regions and territories. So Standard Oil in the industrial Northeast is going to dominate, Ohio, New Jersey, and Illinois. Texaco is going to control most of the Gulf, right? If you're in Louisiana or in the Gulf of Texas, Texaco is people don't even hear of Standard Oil. Okay? A good thing that's not the truth today, right? I always like to use the example of the media, right? You guys go and watch movies and download stuff and TV shows. Go to link, oh, internets, please come hear me. I petition you, internet, please appear. This is from it's from an early 2000 documentary on Frontline. But this thing I'm going to show you is basically, these are the media holdings in this country. That's it, right? Your television, your movies, your radio stations, all come through this relatively small group. Right? The one that's not on here, there are some outliers. GE, for example, is not on here. No one's going to see. But look, this is AOL Time Warner. Right? They sure as hell aren't showing the Super Bowl. What are they doing? Right? I mean, here you got Warner Brothers Television, HBO, Cinemax, Time Warner, CNN, CNN-ST, Turner. Right? The movies, Warner Films. There's, you look at what they control. Here's Viacom. That's another good one. Right? In terms of the CBS, UPN, MTV. Right? We see very different TV stations. They're all part of one corporation. Disney, the mouse. Right? Guys like this, Mountain, ABC, the Disney Channel, Soap Network, all of the ESPN shows. Right? These are oligarchies. These are organizations that control a small number, all of an industry. It is the most efficient organization of organized capital. And we're going to see it in a big regard in terms of the deal today. Okay. Rockefeller is probably the best example of this model during this period of time. He's going to organize the oil industry. Rockefeller is trained in the railroad industry. Almost all these guys work. He's trained as an accountant. Almost all these guys work. Right? Because the railroad industry was the first one to do it, and the accountancy was the goal. You could tell where the money was. You could talk in terms of capital. And what he's going to do, and I'll stop here, this may be an image that kind of sears in your mind. He is going to ruthlessly take control over all of these operations that I talked about in terms of oil. What are they going to say in response to him? Chances are, oh, this has got to be some labor organizer. He's a multimillionaire who's driven out of business by John Rockefeller. This guy is using force to drive competitors out of business. Right? We'll see whether or not how that one works. All right, have a great weekend.